Hey, Chris.
Hello, Brian. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Solid.
All right. Making you a co-host. I'll let the people in. Right. I think the only one not going to be here that we know of is Liz.
Okay, okay. Let's see if I can um display settings, swap. Can I make this not so big? Solid. Good stuff. And then if I do, oops. Uh, uh, can't remember, view multi-speaker or gallery? I think gallery. There we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Silence.
Hi,
Yeah.
Chris.
Thanks, Beth. How was the start of interior lighting? How far did you guys get? Not even Brian's listening. Man, tough crowd.
I was talking to you in the other room. You know as
Oh,
much as
what's
I
the
know.
other room? There's two rooms. Where's the other
No, no,
room?
no. You asked how the interior lighting went, and I don't,
Oh,
I don't
I
know where they
know.
ended. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Lisa got through all the demos that you all had.
Yeah, Lisa ended with like the three, I guess, like fundamentals of decorative lighting. That's what it felt like she was talking about.
Okay.
This is a big day on Tuesday. You guys were there late, like 8:15, something like that. Yeah, it's a long day. When was that? That was Tuesday. That
It's Tuesday.
was Tuesday. I went and worked until 1:30 in the morning. Oh God.
Sheesh.
Yeah,
You
sorry.
gonna do that today too?
Well, my daughter actually on Wednesday, which was yesterday, got a rash at school, and it started coming up from her ankles. And it like started at
Hmm.
her feet were itching, and then it started, coming up her legs, and kind of by lunch, this like itchy rash had gone all the way up her thighs. So I'd gone there in the morning to see if she was okay and given her like a little bit of Benadryl and stuff like that, and then the rash just kept getting, kind of a little bit worse. So the school nurse called me and I went back and picked her up, took her to the doctors, and she has this like very common childhood virus called Fifth's disease.
Hmm.
And basically like almost all kids get it. It's basically benign. It itches a little bit for about 2 weeks and then, kind of like chicken pox, you build an immunity to it. And it's better that kids get it, when they're kids, kind of like with chicken pox, because you get an immunity to the virus and apparently something that was like a little crazy is this particular virus can increases the rate of miscarriages. So they want, you know females specifically to try to have it when they're children or whatever, because it reduces that likelihood, because they could, if they didn't have immunity, they could possibly get it during pregnancy.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting.
we good to go, Brian? What do you think?
Let's see. We're waiting on Peyton, who just joined. We're waiting on, I think, Tom. Let's see, Tom, you on? Tom Jennings. Waiting on Zoe. Don't see Zoe. So I think we're just missing two. I'll keep an eye on it, let them in if they show up. But I think you're good to go. I mentioned that Liz won't be here. Oh, one thing, Ian Paul, were you there on Tuesday? I just
Yeah, I
didn't
was
get a
there
chance
on
to meet you.
Tuesday. I just
Okay.
kind of goofed and ended up being there like 10, 15 minutes late. So I don't know if I definitely didn't sign in or anything, but I was
Okay.
there.
You're good. I was like, the numbers make sense that everyone was there on Tuesday, but I didn't have a yes next to your name. Thanks for confirming. Chris, I think we're good to get started. I guess in general, I would say if people are able to be cameras on, that's probably helpful for Chris, helpful for me. Just, to have everyone be engaged, but I get it if you're not in a position that you're able to do that. And that goes for all the virtual sessions. The recording went out from Tuesday's session, so hopefully everyone received that. If you did not, let me know. This one is being recorded too. All of them will be, so I'll send out this recording after today's session. And I think that's all the announcements. Anything else, Chris?
No, I think that's it. Trying to let me kind of do this here. See if I can do this. Screen one should be here. And then sometimes I like to have this like little annotate dealio. Let me see here if I got a laser pointer. Yeah, can people see laser pointer? Okay, cool. I'll try not to be like super distracting with it. Maybe it'll go with the arrow, a nice little arrow. We'll kind of keep it like that. Does everybody have a pretty good Tuesday? It's kind of nice weather outside.
You mean Thursday?
Oh yeah, whatever day is. Yeah, thank you.
Tuesday was also good.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you for setting me straight there. You can tell I'm completely aware of which day is which at this point. Um, cool. Any questions or feedback from Tuesday? Cool. I appreciate what Brian said with if you guys are comfortable being on camera, it's good. I try to keep, I try to like look at that stuff because I know this stuff is hard. We're all on these calls a lot, just in general in the world. I spend a huge amount of time on video calls. So I know what it's like, but if you need to step away, if you need to grab a drink, I will try to take some breaks in the middle there or whatever, so you can do that. But I mean, it's totally up to you. This class is for you all, and so it's up to you, right? And I try to be, um, engaging with everybody in the class. So like I will also continue to ask questions here if you guys want to do like the old hand raise or whatever, or just go off mute and belch out an answer. It's all good with me, right? We'll try to make it work, try to keep it fun, not be too serious. I'll keep wearing t-shirts because I don't have anything that looks nice as far as clothing goes. But we did get a new TV from the kid, throwing the thing in. So that's solid. Good there. If everybody's okay with it, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on color again to review a couple of things. I found some fun slides that I forgot about that were in a different presentation that I've brought into here, which hopefully will be some fun. And then we're going to do light and health, and then we're going to go into daylighting. I'm also going to move like fairly quick here, and I think I'll try to take like a quick break after the light and health stuff, and that should be in the next like 20, 30 minutes, something like that. Everybody groovy? Groovy, groovy. So we had these color terms here. And the slides I have kind of started, these are slides I put together for like kind of like an advanced lighting class that was specifically about color. So I had some other kind of like deeper stuff, but I think this is just kind of fun. You don't have to like take a whole lot out of it, but we asked the question like, what is light? And I also have the question like, what is color, right? And this would normally be something I would say to everybody at the beginning of this thing, like, does anybody think about color? So I've already like led the witness a little bit on this one, but something that's like kind of interesting, I think, here is to think about like how, we saw that video where people are colorblind and how people perceive colors differently and how people describe colors differently, right? And for a while, I actually thought my son was what's called deuteromic colorblind, which is green blue colorblind, and because he couldn't distinguish the colors. I mean, he just turned 4, so like not a big deal. But now he like has a pretty good idea of the colors. But for a while, he was kind of mixing those up pretty commonly. So, right, like I kind of go down the list here. If you're a computer, right, color to you is entirely some sort of weird, combination of transistor gates, right, that comes into a binary representation. Dolphins do not have color vision. They only have rods, which I think is kind of interesting, right? They're mostly under the ocean, obviously, but they do not perceive color. Everything to them is a grayscale, right? Same with raccoons, which that makes a lot of sense because raccoons are super crazy. Has anybody ever had like a raccoon in the backyard going nuts? No, just me. Okay. There was one time at CU, and we were coming back pretty late from an event, and we opened the dorm door to like go into the stairwell to like go up to the 3rd floor. And no joke, there are like 3 raccoons right at the stair landing, like half a flight up, and they are so pissed, and they are arguing with each other over who's going to get that trash that they just pulled out of the thing. It was super scary. They are like mean animals. Dogs only have 2 color cones, and they see everything as kind of shades of blue and red, right? So it's kind of like how they mix up. They are missing that medium cone in the middle, right? That one that had the green line. It's not really a green cone, but it's the one that was the medium wavelength cone. So they see everything in kind of a 2-color thing. If you're a human, we get that 3rd cone. And then goldfish and eagles have a 4th cone. So they see things in a 4-dimensional color space, right? Because all 4 of those cones are mixing it together. This is supposed to be representational. Sorry, over here. I have no idea what that's like to have a 4th cone, right? I mean, I'm just making stuff up at this point because nobody really gets to ask the goldfish, hey, what does that look like? And then butterflies have 5 cones. And I'd love to know what that's like. I'm not really sure. And then there is a shrimp. I can't remember the name of it, but there's a shrimp that's like a deep water shrimp, and it has 7 cones. And it's a creepy looking dude. It's got eyes that like come out, and like sit way above its head. So those are pretty weird. But I don't know I don't know what it's like to have 5 cones. It's pretty cool. Now here's a interesting deal. Most humans can see, like we said. Does anybody remember the wavelengths that we define light in between?
380 to 720 nanometers, I think.
Close, 780. Yeah. So the 3 and the 7 and the 80s are always the same, right? Very good. So there is generally there is one sex of the humans that usually can see a little bit broader than that. Which one do you think it is?
Emails.
You got it. The superhuman women, for sure. Okay. So here's kind of a fun one, a reminder of those cones, right? So the raccoons, right? They only have one one cone, so they don't get to see color. It's just on or off. And then the dogs have the short and the long. And then these little birdies here, which I can't remember what that birdie is, has got 4. And their 4th cone is in the UV side. So it's this one kind of way over here on the 370 that peaks at 370. That's its sensitivity function. So birds can see UV just like we would see red or blue, right? Which is pretty interesting. A last note on color spaces. Remember that diagram that we were talking about here, which was that CIE diagram? That a lot of stuff like on the CCT stuff where we had 4,000. Does everybody remember that? Yeah, I got like one head nod. Okay. There are other color spaces, and everybody tries to like do a better job at describing color because it's a pretty complex thing and it's mostly anecdotal, right? You ask a human like, what color does this look like to you? Because the color is based on our perception, right, of the wavelengths, and it's different. So there's all these different color spaces, and you ask like, well, why are there all those different color spaces, right? So you might look like this guy when I start talking about color spaces, right? And just remember that all these color spaces are the same thing. They just do the same stuff, just different timelines, right? Just like Keanu Reeves. I don't know if any of these pictures are actually real or not, but there's a thing on the internet about this guy, so I figured I'd pull it in there. Do everybody remember when we talked about TM30 just a little bit, and we talked about how you'd shift hues and how you would render things more or less vibrant? So when I have this kind of thing here and it moves, the arrow is kind of directly in or out of the circle, that's when it gets more or less vibrant, right? So dull colors or very vibrant colors. And then if the arrows shift it, right, that's a color shift. So I wanted to kind of illustrate, oops, how do I clear that? We'll put it over there for now. Clear all drawings. There we go. So there's a blown up picture of kind of what that thing looks like. And you don't have to get everything about TM30, right? What I'm trying to get across here is that the way you perceive the world and the colors of the world are dependent on the light source that you're lighting it with, right? We talked about the source and the modifier. And if the source does not have the right wavelengths, the modifier will not be able to reflect it to you, and you will not be able to perceive that thing as correct. So here's that flower again, and where its color actually lands on the CIE diagram. And this is under daylight. This is under just like the day sky, right? If I light that same thing with 5,000 Kelvin light, so there's like less blues in it, right? There's less blues in the light. You can think of the daylight, the sky that we have today, which has a lot of blue in it. 5,000 K brings that color temperature down a bit, and it has a little bit more oranges. It's a little bit warmer. It's still pretty cool in the scheme of things, but this is a real representation of how it would shift the look of this flower, right? So what I did here is I took the image of the flower and actually did the color math to figure out what this thing needs to look like under that space and do them side by side, right? And everything like that changes. And so, when you're inside your house, things can look very different. The fun part is that your brain usually normalizes it, right? You associate the object with the colors that it looks like under different lights, and your brain does it kind of automatically for you. You know what the toy looks like outside. You know what the toy looks like inside, right? Could be, something else too. So that's my short kind of addition on color. Any follow-up questions there? Besides, why does Keanu Reeves look the same for 800 years? Light and health? All good? I got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people that I don't know if they're doing good or not. Okay, so light and health. There's this part of our visual system, which we don't use for sight, right? We don't use to see the world around us. We use it, as I said, to influence our biology, right? And we generally call this the circadian system. So the items up here, and Brian, can you see my mouse at all, or does it have to be on the pointer thing? You can see my mouse?
Yeah,
Okay.
I can see it.
Okay, if anybody can't see it, just let me know. That's the aspect that influences the visual system. And like I said, there's those cells in the back of the eyeball, which are called the ganglion cells. And there's a specific type, which is called the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. If you can say that 5 times fast, I will give you $5, right? Every time you try it. And those cells are connected into things like the pineal gland. They have a direct biological pathway to the liver and a couple other organs in your body, and they help to send signals for your body to do stuff. So a very similar, what I would call criteria of the both temporal and qualitative aspects of light. What I mean by that is temporal is time, temporal is duration, right? The qualitative is the intensity and the spectrum and the distribution, right? Where's the light coming from? How bright is it? And what does the color look like? Those things together are the same for our visual system, as well as because it's all coming from our eyeballs, right? It's all coming into our eyeballs, and you get your circadian system. And then obviously, there's aspects of your skin like vitamin D and other biological effects that come from your skin absorbing sunlight as well. And we're going to focus mainly on the circadian system, which is into your eyeballs. So the circadian rhythm is, right, your day cycle. So, you know, when the sun comes up, you wake up. When the sun goes down, you go to bed in general. We don't really live that life that well anymore, right? I mean, I am not a good example of what to do as far as your sleep schedule at the moment. But what it does end up happening is generally, right, you know, humans and our biological clock is synchronized from the sun coming up and the sun going down, right? Most humans can't, we're not nocturnal, right? There's the nocturnal animals, we're not that. Speaking of nocturnal, does anybody have an idea of why cats' eyes glow? Any guesses?
They're picking up some, like I guess infrared light that's out at night and then re-emitting it in a spectrum that we can see.
You are really, really close. The good news is it's not infrared. It's just normal light. Their eyeballs in the back have a reflective layer past the cells. And the reason they can see so well at night is because the light goes, right? If you recall the image of the eyeball where the cells are picking up the stuff in the back of the eyeball. So the light actually goes past those cells. It bounces off the back of the eyeball because the back of their eyeballs are reflective. And then it goes through those cells again. So they get two chances to pick up light. And then it comes back out of their eyeballs towards us. Acts like a mirror, basically. It's like they got little mirrors in the back of their eyeballs. That's what makes it glow when you shine a flashlight at them, right? Pretty weird. Back to circadian rhythms. So here's this kind of, biological clock here. There's some really funny ones here, right? But I'm going to start actually at night because I think this cycle is a little bit easier to talk about at night. So when you kind of get home from doing your stuff, right? 1800 is about 6 o'clock. Your body temperature is pretty high. Your blood pressure is pretty high. And then you start to kind of settle down here. And then, right, 9 o'clock is 2100, if I have that math correct. And melatonin secretion starts. So there's a lot of stuff about melatonin. Melatonin is, the same chemical, right? The same hormone that comes in those little bottles. And, you can take that and it will kind of help you fall asleep. Melatonin is the precursor to serotonin, and it helps you kind of calm down in that beginning, and your melatonin levels will rise throughout the night, and that's kind of one of the signals for your body to kind of stay asleep. Right, and so as that happens, right, you go into your sleep mode, you kind of stay asleep, body temperature starts to reduce here, and then in the morning as the sun starts to come up, and the sun doesn't necessarily have to come up, because remember, this is like an entrained cycle of your body, right? It will adjust a little bit, but your body is trying to find kind of like a cycle to be in. And then about 6 a.m. to 7 a.m., the melatonin secretion of your body is going to kind of start to subside, and it's going to stay very low throughout the day. And then you're going to, at 8:30 a.m., your bowel movement is likely. I always think that's a super funny thing that they put in this slide that I just have no idea why they would call that out. You become very alert. The sun is out a lot. And then in the afternoon, you start to become very physically acute. So things like working out, or your strong, like literally like how well can your muscles work, is higher in the afternoon. I used to work out all the time in the morning. Right now, I don't work out in the morning. I usually work out in the afternoon if I get to work out. And it's not because of this, right? It's not because I'm like trying to optimize, like, am I going to be 4% stronger at 4:30 in the afternoon? It's just like, but this is like an interesting thing that happens with your hormone cycles throughout the body. So it affects all these things. So these are, again, kind of like qualitative, right? How much light, what is the light like, AKA the spectrum, and where is it coming from? And then you've got the temporal ones, time of day and duration. Let me see, I can't remember what quite is here. Okay, so we talked about the ganglion cells, right? That are this initial layer. And this is a very interesting kind of concept about the eye, is like, why are the ganglion cells, which don't give us the visual system, why are they first? Why does the light hit those first? Right? I don't know. I don't really know why that is, but they are first. Now, they are photosensitive. They do pick up light, and they do something with it. They excrete hormones when they absorb light, and then they are connected, right, in through the optical nerve into your brain. And then there's this part of your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And if I say that any faster than I just did, I can't pronounce it. And that is a direct connection from the optical nerve. And it's kind of like a part of the brain that acts as a little bit of a coordinator for your circadian rhythm, for your biological clock here, right? And that gets signals straight from your optical nerve and starts sending out signals to your liver, like, hey, liver, don't release any sugar, right, into the bloodstream, right? Hey, the digestive system, stop, right? Cool down. Like, let's not do any digestion right now while we're going to sleep. Things like that, right? It sends other things about muscle repair, right? Tonight, we're going to go to sleep, start doing muscle repair, start to move memories into more long-term memory as opposed to short-term memory. Super important. Has anybody ever tried to stay up for like 4 days straight and you like can't remember anything? No? Addison's got a nod. She's hardcore than all of you guys all over here. Were you gonna say something, Hector?
Never on purpose.
Never on purpose. Yeah, me too. So these intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, right? IPRGCs, and I'll just refer them to that. Their sensitivity function is kind of in the blues, right? So it's about this 485, 490 kind of nanometer range, which is pretty blue. Right? Anybody have any ideas about why it's sensitive to blue?
This guy.
Oh, killer. Man, 10 points. He's stealing all your points. Yeah, that's correct. Right. It lines up very well to basically the sky. And it releases a protein called melanopsin, right? You don't really need to remember that. You can always look it up. It's more important to like remember the concept here, right? Those cells release a protein which elicits a response in the optical nerve. That optical nerve goes to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Did I get that right? Yeah, I did. Amazing. And then you get these signals into your brain to tell your body what to do here. All right, let's see if Ian can get the follow-up question. I've given you the pieces. All right. Where is the highest concentration of IPRGCs in your eyeball?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Anybody got an idea?
Near the phobia.
I
Good
have
guess.
no clue.
So the sky is obviously where in our vision? Top half, yeah? Right? And we also know that when we see things from our eyeballs, like the vision is inverted on the back of our eye. So the highest density of IPRGCs is in the bottom half of your eyeballs, right? There's very few of them on the top half of your eyeballs. Weird coincidence. So I've added this slide. I don't think this is in the slides here, but this is on tunable white. And if you can see here, let me get my pointer out here. This curve right here, if you can see, is 3000K. Has everybody seen like 3000K and 5000K in person? Can they kind of like visualize the difference, right? Like kind of the more whitish blue light and the more warmish kind of yellowish light. So this is what the spectral power distribution of 3000K looks like. And then this blue one is what 5200 or about 5000 looks like, right? So you get this kind of much more energy from the 5000 LED around this peak right here. And so what happens is these IPRGCs, which are responsible for being signaled by blue light. Remember, if we look at the sensitivity function, these things are most sensitive to blue light. That means they get, it's like they're most listening to it. They're like, if you give it some red light, they're like, I don't care. I don't even see it, right? They don't respond at all, right? And what's happening here is those cells are based on blue light are sending signals that, hey, the sun is up, let's do the day things, right? And so when this happens here and you get more bluish light in general, or specifically light that is in this range, has a lot of power in this range, then these IPRGCs will be stimulated and they will tell your body to do things, right? And so based on that sentence I just said, if you get a lot of blue light, these cells will be stimulated. What do you think is the base state for humans? Let me ask the question another way too. What do you think happens if these cells are not stimulated?
Sleepy.
Yeah, you get sleepy. Exactly. Your melatonin will start to secrete. You'll start to get sleepy, right? So staying up in front of a computer, a monitor, all of our phones got the nighttime mode now. Like it's kind of like built in, right? That stuff is literally stimulating these IPRGCs, and they are suppressing your melatonin and will kind of keep you up, right? That's the gist of it, right? It's been related to like a whole lot of health problems over long periods of time, mainly in shift work, right? So workers that kind of work late into the night under white lights, like could be factory workers. A lot of times it's nurses. And so a lot of women nurses, nurses specifically, like women that work in the nursing industry, a lot of times have shift work. It's well correlated that they get higher rates of breast cancer. And so there's a lot of like health implications that have to do with this stuff, right? I can, if you guys want me to look up those studies, feel free. I can also provide some references for that, but I didn't put them in this presentation. You can gut check me on there, and then next time you guys see me, if I'm wrong, you can call me on it. But I've done my homework on this one. Any questions there so far? All good? Okay, cool, Hector. Thanks. Here's a fun experiment that they did one time. They locked a bunch of people. They signed up for it, obviously, in a room for 7 days with no lights. How brutal would that be, right? And what they found was instead of a 24-hour cycle, they had a 28-hour cycle. So they would naturally be awake and sleep, and like their kind of daily cycle moved more towards 28 hours. I honestly, I can't remember like what the reason for that was, but there just seems to be like a little bit of a non-synchronization to like the Earth moving or whatever. And so we are constantly using the daylight and the sky and the sun to kind of like set our biological clock, right? And if you ever have talked to people that have lived in Alaska in the winter, like pretty far north, it gets pretty weird up there, right? They start to act kind of funny. Their sleep gets all weird. They're not mentally clear as much because everything's kind of funky. And the opposite is also true. Most people, when in Alaska, when it's like super bright until 2 in the morning, they don't sleep that much because the sun's up all the time, and they generally feel like pretty okay, right? We still get pretty tired. So this is I also put this together, and I'll go through them like one at a time. Any questions so far? Sorry, Madison.
It's okay. Sorry. I just like threw my iPad at my keyboard too, just to get more attention on what I was about to
Okay,
ask.
cool.
But
Yeah.
isn't that, I mean, I know Alaska's pretty extreme, but I feel like daylight savings is pretty like applicable to people that don't live in Alaska, right? Like everyone just gets so messed up in both sides of it because your whole thing is
Yeah, it
off.
takes a couple of days to adjust. That's absolutely true. And kids are actually really funny on it. I've noticed like the week of daylight savings or inverse, my kids are like acting super weird, and I've heard a lot of people say the same thing. So that's a real thing, and it takes a little bit of time. It can take a couple of days to adjust your circadian rhythm to the new kind of like cycle of how like when the light stuff is going on, because there's like a memory, right? This isn't like an instant change. It's like you're adjusting your cycle over time, and like fast forward to the end of what you should do. If I were to give you like a one-liner, is to try to get a lot of light somewhere between like 9 to 11 in the morning. Go outside, try to get some sunlight. All it has to be is like a 15-minute walk or something like that. And that can be very helpful to help and train your circadian rhythm. It doesn't have to be at 7 in the morning, but it should be before noon. And that can give you like a lot of the benefits. It's kind of like the Pareto principle. Like what's the what's the best bang for your buck as far as like trying to elicit this stuff. If that kind of makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
There was an interesting documentary on the McKinley science station down in Antarctica, and they did a documentary on these people, and in the winter they start to get real funny because like they have not seen the sunlight in like 2 months or something like that, 6 weeks or 2 months or something. The sun just like barely ever comes up, right? So it's nighttime all the time, and they start to get like very brain foggy in the documentary. Like people start forgetting their own names and stuff like that. It's just really funny. And then they kind of come out of it. It's just like they're that whole like um, hormonal cycle has been totally like screwed up for them, and they sleep at weird times and they sleep weird hours and stuff like that. So in the space station, the International Space Station, they actually have a very specific like they have a prescription for the amount of light that they're supposed to get in the International Space Station, and then they sleep in these blackout pods, right? Because the space station's going so fast, around the Earth, right? It goes around the Earth every 82 minutes. So they get like sunlight and then darkness every 42 minutes, right? It's constantly cycling like that. Sorry, 41 minutes. Bad math. And then, do I have that right? Is it 82 minutes? I feel like I'm almost positive it is, but sorry, don't call me on the 82 minutes. I'm pretty sure it's like something like that, right? Somebody Google that right now. How long does it take for the space station to go around the Earth? And then interrupt me. Thank you, Ian. I can see you typing over there furiously. Um, is that an artichoke in your mouth, or what is that? Oh, I love artichokes. So they have a prescription in the space station for like when they're supposed to have light and what the spectrum's supposed to be. What is it, Ian?
I see 90 minutes. At least that's what hour and a half.
Okay,
But I
90
don't know if
minutes.
that's just
Sorry.
being,
No, that's probably right. That's probably
summarized.
close. Yeah, I try to be in the right order of magnitude. Um, okay. So here's a couple of summary points on kind of tunable white systems. So the Department of Energy what's the word I'm looking for here? Sponsored a study that PNNL, which stands for Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. They're up in, Brian, help me out here, Seattle? I think
I think so.
Seattle.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Bob worked there for quite a while. I think he's
Mm-hmm.
still working there. And what they used a tunable white system, and the studies like kind of looked at like, well, what happened, right? And their goal was to mimic how CCT changed over day naturally, right? So it's cooler in the midday because you get like the whole blue sky, right? And obviously in the morning and the evening, it's more of a warm light because the sun is lower in the sky and it has more scattering. And so you get like lower temperatures, basically like the warm hues you're used to seeing in sunlight and sunset, right? And basically what they found is that by doing this, you use more energy, right? There was a study out of the LRC which looked at if you can increase circadian entrainment, that's a good thing for elderly patients, specifically ones with like some mental problems like Alzheimer's disease or dementia. And they use these metrics that are used for classifying basically like how well do people feel that have kind of dementia and similar issues, and basically like having good circadian entrainment like helped these patients, right? So same idea, right? Like I used to, when I would visit my grandfather that was in a like an elderly home, right, like an assisted living community when he was about 87, we try to go outside in the morning, right, because it makes a big difference to them rather than you're just like sitting in your room that has like a shitty lamp in the corner, and that's basically it, right? That's not enough light to actually elicit the response. PNNL did another one, which is on a tunable classroom. And the interesting thing here was that it reduced the energy usage. This is all about tunable white systems, by the way. But it was highly like individualized. Some teachers like to use it, other ones like didn't use it at all. So I would say mixed results on this study about like how beneficial it was. Then there was another one that PNNL did, right? You can see that these guys do a lot of work in the lighting arena. And in Texas, they basically retrofitted a middle school and an elementary school in a district, same district, and tried to figure out like, did the kids like it or not? And now the interesting thing about this one was that they gave a lot. They gave both. They had fluorescent lamps and they gave LEDs that were dimmable. Okay, so that's key number one, but also tunable. And you can see here that the spectral power distribution control, which is the tunable aspect, was used infrequently, as opposed to the dimming, which was used much more frequently. But in general, they had like good reactions to it. So there's some interesting, anecdotal conclusions from this stuff, which is number one is that controlling your lights, everybody likes that. The ability to raise, lower, give individualized control over your light levels in your space. People have a psychological improvement based on that capability, right? So everybody's different. Some people are younger and older. The ability to control your lights leads to a more comfortable environment. And people generally just have a positive experience about it. Lots of our memory and our perception is subjective, right? And that being said, like the tunable white does have a lot of merit. And I have a picture in here, which is from Kevin Hauser and a couple of others that wrote a paper in 2021 about basically tunable white and circadian rhythm and all this stuff. And this is a really good quote, I think. This is not a statement by the IES, so I have put this in here. So please take it with a grain of salt, right? Feel free to do your own research. But what Hauser said, and Hauser's a really, really well-respected light researcher, kind of in the North American community, right? He says there are 4 variables for non-visual responses, aka circadian rhythm, and the authors agreed that the order of importance there is the temporal pattern, right? And that is the time of day, right? And how long. The intensity, in other words, the amount of light. The spectrum, third, which is it cool temperature, warm temperature, etc. And then the spatial pattern of light. So is it glary? Is it comfortable? Is it diffuse and soft, or is it harsh? These are all like kind of descriptive words, but the spatial pattern of light would take those descriptive words and make it into more of a scientific thing. Meaning, like, does the light come from above? Does it come from the walls? Does it come from a source in your view? Things like that, right? And that's fourth. So that is their opinion of the order of importance there. And so, like I said, the temporal pattern is time of day and duration. And then second is the amount of light. So, to bring this back to my earlier point about, going outside sometime in the morning, is that the amount of light that's outside is massive, right? And you can get a lot of the benefit because of how much light you're going to get in the being outside. There's just so much more light than there is inside, right? We'll talk about that here in a bit. In daylighting, how am I doing on time? Yeah, pretty good. Okay, so there's another aspect of light and health, which is around safety. Obviously, on the stairway on the left, you can't see anything. The likelihood of you tripping and missing your step, even if you're not, even if like you can walk upstairs totally fine, right? You may not be paying attention to the stairs, but you've ever seen somebody that's like that's like looking at their phone as they're walking up the stairs and they like trip. It's just that like your brain is constantly taking in that spatial information in 3 dimensions from all around your peripheral. And so like you're constantly figuring out where that next step is, right? And if you can't see these, obviously you have a higher likelihood of like fall hazards and stuff like that. So just having light in the right place helps a lot. Obviously, like in the second image here, can you see what you're trying to do at speed? So if you have a road hazard, right, you may need more time or more light to see that road hazard. And then this last one here is like a perception of safety. So there's a concept, we haven't talked about this yet, but there's horizontal illuminance and vertical illuminance. And illuminance is just a fancy word for light, right? And horizontal is on the floor, it's on our table, on our desk. Can we see the things that we need to do? Can we read that book? And then vertical is obviously it's like on a vertical surface. So if I'm walking towards you, can you see my face? And this image here of a person in an alleyway is a good one. Usually the response that people have to this is caution, right? You can just imagine from like an evolutionary standpoint, you kind of want to see what's coming at you, right? Do you need to be worried or not? And if you can see their face, their expression, what they're holding, all that kind of stuff, it just really calms down the inherent instincts that we all have. Here's a couple of things for light treatments, right? The most common one is the intensive care, right? The NICU. And sometimes kids need light therapy for jaundice, which is pretty frequent, right? It happens quite often. And then there's also other like more specific light treatments for babies that are born premature that don't necessarily have jaundice, right? They actually give them light treatment as well, right, in the NICU. And as far as jet lag goes, you can actually have there are baseball teams which experiment with circadian lighting systems in the plane in their private jet for the team. And also, whenever they get to the hotels, they actually use a circadian light prescription to try to like speed up their biological adaptation to the new time zone, because they're not just going there to play one night, right? So in football, you go there, you play a game, right? You play one game, you go back. In baseball, you fly there and you're there for 7 days, right? And so usually if you guys have like flown to Europe or anywhere else, the jet lag's not too bad 12 hours in. But then at about day 2 or 3, it's like starting to really kick in. It takes a while to adjust to that. So again, that's your body like has that inertia for your adaptation. Any questions? Boom, that's done. Here's some resources. You guys all have this slide, so you can look at the resources. That's it for that. Any questions? Sorry, I think I just asked that. Groovy. Does anybody want to take a break? We've been going for about 45 minutes. Is that a Tyler? You want to take a break, or you guys want to keep going? Just want to keep going. Okay, all good. All right, I'm all good too. Give me 1 second to load up this new one. And let me swap the presenter here. Same thing you've already seen. On to daylighting. All you wonderful people will be able to do these things, right? Characterize daylight, analyze basic metrics of daylight, compare approaches. So before we start this, does anybody have like a memory of a space that is like just really well lit from daylight compared to like a room or a space that is not well lit and is like purely electric light? You don't have to answer that question. You can just think about it. I mean, or you could answer it. It's up to you. I worked at this like really big company called, it was called Cooper Lighting at the time, and then it got sold to, I don't know, some other company, and then it got spun off of that company, and then now it's owned by Signify, also known as and then Genlight and Cooper, both owned by the same company, which is really weird. And Cooper had this giant building in a place called Peachtree City, Georgia, which is literally named after the peach trees there. And it's a really weird city because there's a bunch of like corporate headquarters there, and everybody drives golf carts everywhere, like souped up golf carts, like lifted roof racks, like big stereos, all sorts of weird stuff. But there's bike paths like that you can get everywhere. So a lot of people literally like drove their golf carts to work. And this building had like a sea of troffers, right? It was like the sea of cubicles. It went on forever, right? You had to walk from the time it took me to like walk to my desk as an intern there from the front door took like 3 to 4 minutes of like straight walking through cubicle sections. You can imagine that. Not a window in the place, right? So you always want to go outside. That place kind of sucked as far as like daylighting goes. And then I've been in some really nice spaces that tend to like treat architecture quite a bit better. And they're just like really pleasant to be in my opinion. It's nice to have a window or something like that you can see out of. So then and now, right? So there's this interesting cycle that happened with daylighting. I don't know when this picture was taken, but I'm assuming it's sometime around the 30s, if I had to guess, maybe early 40s, something like that. So we used to have these big, oh, I'm sorry, my mouse should be over here. We used to have these like big windows that let a bunch of light in, right? This is kind of before like highly distributed electricity. Like it was very expensive to put in light fixtures and stuff like that. And like we're talking early days. This was you're coming off of lighting stuff with gas that we talked about with those gas chandeliers. You're coming out of that era. So you're trying to retrofit all these things with electricity, right? Which is expensive. And then once you turn the buildings over, right, it gets much cheaper because you just rebuild it with the new thing. But they used to have a lot of daylight. Well, that makes sense because they didn't have a lot of easily controllable light sources. You had to go up there and light your gas chandelier. What's up, Seth? They're outside in the backyard. I'm giving a presentation. You want to come say hi? Okay. Remember how you were helping me with that presentation? Everybody's waving to you. Yeah. So we're talking about that lighting stuff that you wanted to see. Yeah. And so they really needed these windows, like a lot of windows and a lot of daylight because, you know, you didn't have that many lights internally and it was hard to install them, right? And then what happened is kind of people started to realize that there was like an energy crisis, right, in the 70s. And during the energy crisis, everybody doesn't want to use AC, right? Because like electricity was like super expensive. So what happened there, if you can imagine that you don't have the right technology for like what's called solar heat gain, which we'll talk about here in daylighting, is that the windows were letting in a ton of heat because all that infrared that's coming through the window from the sun is going to heat up that space. And so you only got two options there, right? Your option one is to open the windows, and your option two is to run AC, right? Air conditioning. So what they started to do is they started to do a lot less windows, a lot less fenestration penetrations in the building envelope. And what ends up happening there is you need to, you know, fluorescents were in their heyday. Like everybody was installing fluorescent lamps. And you started to get this environment that just kind of had like what I'm talking about, that grid of troffers or grid of lights that's just like real boring and mundane. But it became very easy, right? Electricity was well distributed in the late 60s and 70s. You know, you kind of get that was the artifact, right? So they're trying to save energy, and that was the heating was identified as the thing that they could control with the architecture. Then the pendulum swings. And what ends up happening is everybody realizes that, well, that kind of sucked. Let's not do that anymore. And the pendulum kind of swings back. But now you've got a lot more technology to do it. You've got better window films, better window coatings. The insulation can be a lot better. Instead of just a brick wall, right? You have like air gaps. You have different styles of building, different technologies and building science. So now you can bring those windows back in. And then eventually over here, now we get to the more complicated and the more effective methods of controlling your daylight, right? And we'll talk about these things up in the top right here on this fourth number 4. Does that all make sense? That kind of like arc of time of daylighting, and everybody's seen those like giant concrete buildings that have like little tiny windows and there's like a ton of them. You know what I'm talking about? They look very like monolithic and what's the word I'm looking for? Like it's not Baroque. It's I don't know. I don't remember from like my architectural classes days, but you guys know what I'm talking about. So you know, it's hard to value daylighting. There's a lot of people that will give you a lot of reasons about why daylighting is very important, and I'm here to be one of those people as well, right? But you know, ultimately, like I think the best people that do a good job at illustrating the benefits of daylight are well-educated architects and people that study this like and can link up the science and the biology and that kind of stuff. And at some point, those technologies, you know, like really good glass on windows was expensive. And nowadays, like we've figured out like what are good ways to do this. You know, you don't have to spend, you know, a whole lot more money to have a well daylit building because we think about the techniques and not just the technology. But we talked about like how the day sky and like high levels of light can be good for your health. And you know, these are some aspects about how it can influence your overall day. I alluded to it brings some challenges. We talked about solar heat gain. Does that concept of solar heat gain make sense to everybody? Right. I've got one particular window in my house that's really bad and I get direct sunlight, and every once in a while my son will like lay there on the carpet as the sun just like beams on to like one part in the carpet. It's like really bright and he's like, this is great. But glare is also a big one, right? You get that, especially in the winter here when the sun's starting to get pretty low and you can see like right out and the sun's kind of getting low in the sky and it comes right through the window. really affects your view. This other one is that I'm going to call sight limitations is think about in New York where everything is a skyscraper, right? It's really hard to like do good daylighting in New York because basically like your entire view of the sky and the sun is being blocked by another skyscraper. It doesn't really matter which direction you're facing, right? Until you get to kind of the high floors. So that can be challenging, but it's not just limited to New York. I think that's just like the easiest example that comes to mind. Again, there's some cost and complexity, but we have good professionals that study this stuff and they have it worked out pretty well. Now, the last challenge is variability, right? And everybody should kind of has probably heard in the news about how like solar panels are challenging because the sun doesn't shine all day, right? Same idea. If you're going to rely on daylight to provide a portion of your just working light to be able to see your piece of paper, to be able to see your desk, be able to walk around, you also have to deal with the variability where you have clouds, where you have the sun, which changes angle in the sky, obviously, and other aspects kind of around that, right? Any questions? No questions. Does those all make sense? Like we're doing pretty good? Okay. Easy peasy, smart crowd. There are a bunch of codes and standards that have been adopted, and obviously like codes and standards are adopted at a local level or a state level. Sometimes it's municipality, right? It could be that the state enforces one level of a code and the municipality has an option to override that with a more stringent code. That's pretty common. Boulder is a classic offender of this where they're like, yeah, like do the most advanced thing. And the state of Colorado is kind of like, you guys can do kind of whatever you want. And then you've got, something like, Delta Colorado, which really doesn't care because it's mostly farmland and, they don't care about the codes, right? And it's just kind of a different environment out there. So, but we've got the international, what does ICCC stand for? Conservation Code? Yes.
Energy conservation.
Energy conservation. Thank you. International Energy Conservation Code. Thank you. And then you got the National Energy Code of Canada. You got LEED. So there's a whole bunch, and there's ASHRAE standards as well. ASHRAE is the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration. I should know this. And energy. Ian, you want to go to the web again? Do me some Googlies. I can't remember. It's not good. Lack of sleep starting to affect my brain. Ian will hook us up. Additional ones are California. California has its own code called Title 24. Madison, did you have it?
No, I was gonna guess, but I trust Ian can Google it well.
No, Madison, what's your guess?
I was gonna say architectural and engineering, AE.
Yeah, I believe it is American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineering. So I guess it was you were half.
The last one's kind of vague. Air conditioning engineers. Yeah, that's a little vague. That's basically my wife. Cool.
She is.
Oh, I'm sorry, Madison. Go ahead. Yeah, I think she is an ASHRAE member, if I remember correctly. But we have very interesting conversations right before bed about boilers and heat pumps and all sorts of weird stuff. Right? That's our. She hates talking about that stuff right before bed. She's like, I do this all day. Why would I want to talk to you about this before bed? And I'm like, because I don't do this all day and I find it interesting. So teach me. Has everybody heard of LEED? Has everybody heard of WELL? Just out of curiosity. Jorgensen says no. Yeah. So WELL is kind of like LEED, but it's kind of tailored more towards like human well-being, right? LEED would be like, hey, we want to be super energy efficient. And WELL is kind of like we want to make like a building that is really great for humans to be in. That's kind of the way to think about those two things. Okay, how does daylight work? What are the characteristics? So the Earth is on a tilt, right? And as the 365 days a year, it is going around the sun. The place that the sun is going to be at 12 noon, right, on the earth is going to change. We all know this because are old enough to have gone through this. But our sun obviously rises in the east and sets in the west. And here in Colorado, we have a great one because we are at the 40th degree longitude. Latitude. Latitude is lateral. We are at the 40th latitude. And so that's like right at Baseline Road in Boulder. So we're very close to that. That happens to be about the midpoint of where the equinox is in the sun, 40 degrees. Now on the winter solstice, right, the highest it's going to get is going to be lower in the sky, and in the summer it's going to be higher in the sky, right? It's always going to be on the south side for us because we are in the northern hemisphere. If that makes sense. Any questions there, or is this like super intuitive? Tyler, do you have a question or good? Okay, thumbs up. All right, solid. So there's two ways to describe where the sun is. Or I should say there's two values, two parameters. One is called the azimuth angle, which is like, like this way, right? You got that boat gyroscope, and it tells you like which direction you're heading, east, west, north, south, right? And that's at any point on the earth. And then the altitude is like how high it is, right? How high am I going? Same concept, but it's called the altitude angle, and that's like how high in the sky from the horizon is it. So you can see how like you can use these two angles, right, to describe how the sun travels throughout the day for any given day of the year. Does that make sense? And there are databases which you plug in your latitude and longitude, and it will tell you where the sun will be every minute of the day of the whole year, right? And it actually calculates it out into the future too, because there's slight variations in the wobble. It's fun to think about the Earth just like wobbling, right? Or is that just me? Okay. So the components of daylight are three ways to classify the type of daylight that's coming in, or the component as referred to here. There's the direct sunlight, there is the sky, and then there is the reflected light. That could be reflected off a building, a mountain, snow, dirt, the asphalt, whatever it is, right? But remember what we're talking about here with light is the visual spectrum, right? And that's light and specific. But we also talked about solar heat gain, right? Which will be the IR component of sunlight. And this is where the vocabulary starts to break down. Remember I said don't get too anal about it, because we'll say daylight and sunlight, and we'll say like, yeah, that has infrared in it, right? But light is defined as this specific range, right? Don't worry about it. Just think about the concepts too much, right? Try not to get too serious about it. This term here, which is called Rayleigh scattering, or Rayleigh scattering, depending on how you pronounce it. So you may have an idea about what happens there or what it causes. Ian is nodding his head like he is very confident in the answer he's about to give.
I was waiting to see if anyone else would say anything, but it's what makes the sky blue. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
That is correct. You know how it works.
Yeah. Because blue is higher energy, it gets oh shoot, now I'm like totally losing my explanation.
You're
But it
there.
has to
You're
do with
so
the
close.
different wavelengths and how much they react as they hit the air and how much they reflect or get absorbed.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and the very specific word that you're looking for is how much it scatters. So the blue light with higher energy scatters off particles in the atmosphere, and that's what makes the sky blue. It's also because of Venus, right? Somebody might tell you that. It's not true. Okay, so nice job, Ian. Way to go, man. So skylight, sunlight, reflected light, right? This has an image where you can't really see the direct sunlight, but you can see the sky and the clouds pretty well. And obviously there's going to be some good amount of reflected light. And you can always correlate sunlight and shadows, right? Shadows don't happen really from the sky. They happen from the sun. Does that make sense? The intensity from the sun is really, really high. So of daylight in general, you get about 5% of the weighted energy What I mean by weighted energy is that UV photons, right? We talked about the electromagnetic spectrum. UV photons carry more energy, right? Because like what Ian said, blue's got more energy. UV's got even more. X-rays got even more. So I got to protect my body, and then gamma rays make us into the Hulk. So weighted on the amount of energy the photons carry is about 5% energy in UV, 45% invisible, and 50% in infrared. A lot of heat, right? So it makes it feel good. And then this is interesting, just like you don't need to remember this stuff, but here's like the equivalent electrical luminous efficacies, right? Pretty good. Okay. So the sun by itself, obviously because it's got a little more, it's a burning ball of fire, has some yellows in it. And its overall color temperature is 5,300 Kelvin. But the sun and the sky combined is about 6,000 Kelvin CCT. And that's the false color diagram here. It's not the black lines, but the false color diagram. Has anybody ever been under electric light that's 6,000 K? This is a younger crowd, so I'm going to be surprised if anybody's been under it. Taking that as a no. There was a warehouse we used to have, and we had 5,700 K fluorescent tubes, T12 tubes in them, 8-footers, and at about 30 feet high. Really crappy old fixtures, and there was like 6 of them, right? And it was 5,700 Kelvin, and you would be in there for about an hour and a half, and you would start to feel like kind of sick. The color temperature was so bad. But if you remember that diagram I showed on the CIE diagram, right? 6,000 is a line, right? And it's also an averaging of the spectrum. You could have a fluorescent. Does everybody remember the fluorescent thing that had all these spikes? We're looking at the sun here, which has a nice even spectral power distribution. LEDs kind of have this big hump and then a spike where the blue pump is, right? All this, the spectral power distribution and the uniformity of it matters. The sun and the sky are super comfortable to be under for a long period of time, even though the color temperature of it is 6,000. And a 6,000 K lamp, like a fluorescent or an LED, is not super fun to be under for a long period of time. It is hard to find anything over 5,000 these days. I don't know of any fixtures anymore that do that. Here's some interesting, kind of 360-degree photos of the sky on different days. And this false color diagram is the luminance false color map of the it's in candelas per meter squared. We haven't done metrics yet, but right, luminance is kind of equivalent to brightness. So there's something interesting that happens here. Let's go back and forth between these a couple of times. So if I have a clear sky where I can see the sun directly, right? I have this big red dot here as far as my brightness goes. You guys can see my mouse, yeah? Okay. That's pretty high. That's like, right, 20,000 candles per meter squared, really, really bright. I mean, just imagine trying to look straight at the sun. I would not recommend doing that. Now, a partly cloudy sky is interesting. Obviously the sun is behind this, but why does this big spot like blur out so much? Why does it get so much bigger? Right? Obviously the clouds are kind of diffusing the light a little bit, and they're scattering the light a little bit, and they're refracting the light a little bit due to the moisture in the air in the clouds. But it spreads out that image of the sun, but it doesn't actually reduce the intensity of it very much. So a cloudy sky that's kind of like this, that's partly cloudy, can be very, very bright because the overall size of that high luminance, that high brightness thing grows, and it takes up more of your visual peripheral. And then overcast skies really mute the brightness, like very, very overcast skies, right? They mute the brightness a lot. As far as like designing for sky conditions, you've got these maps. This one I think is from ASHRAE, if I'm not mistaken. And the goal here is what they're doing is they're telling you how many days of sunlight you're going to have, how many days of clear sky and cloudy sky. such that you can design your heating and cooling loads properly for that environment, right? You take this map and you take the average temperatures and you take the rainfall and you mix all those things together as a mechanical engineer, and you get your heating and cooling loads. This is also very useful to say, like, how much of my electric light can I offset with daylight? If we're way up here in Washington, we're in B zone up here on the left. You are only going to get between like basically 2 months of clear sky days, like 60 days, right, of clear sky. So not very much. So you really can't get the same amount of compensation of your interior light, even with these techniques, that you could in Denver, you know, areas like that. Zone H here kind of covers a lot of Arizona, New Mexico, and a lot of California. There's about 150 to 180 days of clear skies, right? So this is about the orders of magnitude that our visual system can accommodate. I think this is kind of an interesting deal here. Has everybody like just heard the term foot candles, at least? What way do you normally hear them talked about? Ivan, I'm calling on you, man.
Like lighting calcs usually.
Yeah. Brittany, like what, give me an example.
Yeah, calking foot candles of a desk in an office.
Do you like normally try to hit a target, and like what would be like a number you'd try to hit? Do you know off the top of your head?
Yeah, 20 to 30.
Yeah, 20, 30. Sounds good. So that's 20 to 30 foot candles. Now the short, napkin math version of converting lux, which is in meters squared to foot candles, which is in square feet, right? For amount of light on a surface, square area. You can't say square area. Sorry, that's a double entendre. Just area. If I square my area, I get to the fourth power. That's about that's 10 times. So if we were to say, for instance, that you take that desk and you want to get 20 foot candles on that desk, we multiply that by 10, we get 200 lux. Okay. Now, we just say that the sky is clear and it's only the sky. That's 15,000 lux. We divide that by 10, we get 1,500 lux. 1,500 foot candles, right? So 1,500 foot candles from just the clear sky. Let's think about that. Our desk is going to be 20 foot candles, and outside in the clear sky, I'm going to get 1,500. Big difference. And then if we go from the direct sunlight that's coming straight from the direct sun, we're going to have something like 10,000 foot candles, right? This is 100,000 lux, divide by 10, 10,000 foot candles. So big, right? That's like orders of magnitude, right? So 20 to 200 to 2,000 to 20,000. That's like 3.5 orders of magnitude. So your visual system can adapt to this in a pretty crazy way. Don't worry about my shoes there that have not been polished in 8 years. Don't worry about it. I got kids. Okay. Can everybody see this foot candle meter like fairly decently on the numbers here? Okay, so on the left here, this was one desk. It's a little hard to see, but there is a dot there. That says 16.8 foot candles. Okay. I apologize for that dot being kind of small, but and this is in foot candles. Now, this was a desk at Visual Interest, right? And Visual Interest had these skylights kind of in their building. And then on a different desk, which had a skylight right above it, which was diffuse, right? It had like a diffuse thing. The sun wouldn't come straight through it, but it had like a white, film on it. That was 222 foot candles. So two desks that are like 8 feet apart had like less than 20 and over 200. There's our one order of magnitude. And those desks to me were like, I could, see fine, no difference, Obviously, like nowadays, maybe 20 is a bit low for me. But in general, like most people could see fine. And then I went outside and there's like a glare line right in between. There's a perfect example of glare and how, or veiling glare, right? Reflected glare. But that is 553 foot candles. So that was outside in the shade, right? So basically the building was shading it. So it was just about whatever that shade spot could see of the sky, no sun. And then over here was in the direct sunlight, and that is 8.74 kilo foot candles. So that's 8,740 foot candles. And we go back here, we say the direct sun is about 10,000 foot candles. Math checks out, right? About 8,700 foot candles. So this is a fun experiment because I was like, oh, math works out. That's cool, you know? And I think you all can like remember like going outside on a sunny day from being indoors where your average foot candle that like Brittany, like you said, is maybe 50 max, right? Like your average. And then you go outside and it's like 10,000. You know, how long does it take you to see? Not that long. So there's a non-uniformity here, right? Because our visual system works in a logarithmic scale. So like you can see everything pretty good inside between like 10, 20, 30, maybe small differences, right? But in general, you can see 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Those all kind of look the same. And then now you go outside and it's like 10,000. And in the shade, it's only 500. But you can see the shade and the, you know, the pavement that has the direct sunlight on it pretty much fine together, right? And that is now a difference of 500 and 5,000. So you went from seeing a difference of 10 to a difference of seeing 5,000 outside, and your visual system can handle all that kind of simultaneously. So it has a huge range, which is really interesting. Nothing new here. Everybody good on this slide? Okay, how do we deliver daylight? Do you want to take a break? We're making good progress. We will be probably done early if you guys want to keep hammering, and I'm totally fine for it. Okay, Brittany says thumbs up. If you really need to take a bathroom break, feel free to go do it. No worries on me. Okay. Okay, delivering daylight. So the first thing you got to do is evaluate your site and your orientation of your building, right? If your site, like I said, is in New York, or if it is in the mountains, you know, and it faces maybe it's like a north facing kind of hill or a south facing kind of hill, it's going to make a big difference in just the overall temporal nature of the sunlight, right? So first thing is site and orientation of your building. You can orient your building in very specific ways and design your building in very specific ways to give yourself a lot of daylight or block it intentionally if you have a lot of sunlight. A good example of this is like if you're in high or low latitudes, the sun does not get very high ever, right? In kind of like a long period of time. So think about being in like Washington, where in the winter, the sun kind of literally just goes like this. It doesn't ever get above your like direct view. So you have to think about that depending on your latitude. Next is where you're going to have openings in your fenestration. That means like windows, mainly windows, right? The third is glazing. What are you going to do with those windows? Are you going to put any infrared rejecting treatments? Are you going to have what's called low emissivity glass, which is to reduce light and or IR? Are you going to have high visual transmission, HVT glass, but also reject the IR? And these things are a little bit in odds with each other because basically like glass that lets everything through, but the more control you want over it, the more expensive it gets. Shading and how do you want it to transmit inside the space? So this is kind of a hard slide to describe, and I'll try to do my best here. And I think we're all kind of here in Denver kind of area. Is anybody not here in Denver? In the Springs? I think there was one or two people that were in the Springs. Close enough, all the same, for as far as like where the sun is, right? So when you're up here on the building that has a long side that faces north, that means that this north facing side of the building will never get direct sunlight, right? Because that's just the way that like the sun travels, like we're in the northern hemisphere. Therefore, the sun will always be in the southern hemisphere, no matter where we are. So that will never get direct sunlight. That means you can always count on this side here that faces south. You can do specific treatments to deal with direct sunlight because it's almost always going to get direct sunlight. And then if you think about where the sun rises in the direct east, basically the direct east, the sun comes up and gets out of direct view of this east and west window pretty quickly, right? Because of the arc that it travels. So then you don't really need to do any treatment on the east and west. that make sense? The worst one over here is where you have only a little bit of space that can see north or south, because then you get two bad things. You don't get a lot of your building facing direct sunlight, so you don't get to harness that direct sunlight. You don't get anything facing directly north, which can see just the nice blue sky or cloudy sky if it's a cloudy day. And you get a lot of your space that gets hammered right in the beginning of the day with direct sunlight, and a lot that gets hammered in the afternoon with direct sunlight. And so it causes a lot of glare. And people kind of envision how this is happening. This is a hard slide to describe over a Zoom call, but is this kind of making some semblance of sense? If you can envision that, and there's things in between. So here are kind of the pluses and minuses and ways to deal with this stuff, but we're going to try to bring it in. You okay, Ian, or something else happening? Okay, all good. All right. I was afraid I did something stupid and you were laughing at me. So it has these different orientations and what parts of the building, you know, what influences. So it's kind of just what I talked about, right? And this is a kind of you know, you can talk about this for a long time, but I think we're going to kind of skip this slide a little bit and talk about the techniques here. So you can light from the side. And let's imagine that this part of the building here, let me get this pointer out, is facing south. So where 5 and 4 are facing south. So it's about, you know, noon. It's sometime maybe like, you know, springtime. Actually, right now is a really good example. The sun's not going to be at its peak, so it's not going to get quite as high in the sky as it would. So we're going to have some direct sunlight coming in. This arrow, red arrow right here, is going to be direct sunlight. And what we're going to do is we're going to break the window, in a sense, with what's called a light shelf right here. And we're going to bounce that light up into the space to hit the ceiling, right? Everybody envision that? Now, the great thing about that is, like, I'm right here. Do I have like a cool stamp I can use? There used to be like stamps in here. I used to have like a lot of fun with them. Oh yeah, okay, this is me right here. That little heart right there, that's my heart. So the light that would have hit me in my eyes is being reflected directly into my eyes, is being reflected up towards the ceiling, and the ceiling's all white. So it's going to be nice and diffuse, right? And that way I don't get the direct glare, but I get to have my view, and now I get to draw. Drawing is good with this stuff. Let's see, vanishing pen. Let's just use the pen, and let's use, we're on the red kick, so I'm going to go with purple, right? My view is out there. So I still get my view, but the direct sunlight that's coming is going to bounce off this light shelf and go into the space. It's going to give me a lot of light, which is really nice, but it's not going to go directly into my eyeballs, or in this case, my heart. You know, does that make sense there? You can use this technique on multiple floors. When you start to drive around Denver, if you start to look at the architecture, you will see some of these things that we're talking about. If you drive on I-70 near Colfax ever, you can look at NRail, the variety of buildings at NRail. You will see a bunch of these techniques that they've implemented. Okay, so there's this other thing up here, which is called a clerestory window, sometimes called a monitor, depending on, you know, is it just at the top of a room, or this is usually called like a monitor light. And what you're allowing there is the light to come in, but there is no direct view into the space, right? It's all reflected light. And that gives you a chance to make the light more bounced around, more soft, by basically painting this surface right here white, which I am going to paint in green, right? If that area is nice and white, then it'll just kind of like be nice and diffuse, just like a nice diffuse, you know, soft table, or a nice piece of paper that's like matte. Right. So when I use the term diffuse, think of a matte piece of paper. And when I think of like specular, it's a glossy piece of paper that, you know, maintains reflections. Top lighting is really straightforward. And then now let's invert our north-south and think about all the stuff over here near the number 1 is facing north in Denver. Is everybody with me so far? Stick with me just mentally for like, you know, one more minute, and this will kind of all make sense, I think. I don't need to put any light shelves or direct glare control over on this side of the building because this is facing north. The only thing I'm ever going to see north in Denver is the blue sky. There's no direct sunlight, so it will, by its nature, be much more pleasant, much more soft, and not cause any visual glare. That kind of makes sense. Do we bring it together a little bit? It's really funny. Hector's thing is frozen on my screen. I think his thing crashed. He's back. Okay. All right, let's clear all these. Sorry to spend so much time on this slide. It's just kind of difficult to get, you kind of got to visualize some of this stuff in your head. So I apologize for taking so much time on it. Okay, so here's some like very specific definitions if you have this, right? There's an overhang, straight window, right? No treatments necessarily. There's the clerestory window, which is a window at the very top of the room. There's the roof monitor, which is kind of you bring in the light, but you can't see the window. You can just see the glow up there. Then you've got, skylights and conical wells. And then you've got over here, I think that's just a window or, like I don't really have a name for that. I'm not sure I would know what to call that really. Or what that space, maybe that's a room. I don't know. Okay. So when we talk about daylight, there's like top lighting and side lighting, right? Go into side lighting a little bit. Obviously unilateral, one side of the building, bilateral is two sides of the building. If you can elongate your building along the east-west axis, that's the best. And now here's kind of an interesting idea, and I'm gonna see if I can pose a thought experiment in your head. If I want to maximize the coverage of daylight capability in my building, what should my aspect ratio be? What I mean by that is, should my building be square? Should it be rectangle? Should it be a kind of a short rectangle? Should it be a long rectangle? Should it be somewhere in the middle? Right, just kind of think about that. Again, so these three things that I was bringing up, the light shelf is very useful. And also another very useful thing is to do a clerestory with a diffusing film on it. That could be really nice because what happens is the sun comes into the diffusing film. And what diffusing films do is they kind of make the light go like this, right? Instead of just being like one hard line, we'll do yellow for the sun and we'll make it really thick. Light comes in one harsh line. And then it gets kind of, spread out, and that spreading out is really nice. So you can put a nice window film on a clerestory here, and that can be a really nice thing. And when that happens, you lose your direct view, right? You can't view the things outside because you're intentionally making the view opaque, translucent to mitigate that direct sunlight. Okay. So now if I just had a window, I get this line right here that's in orange is intended to be the amount of light that you get from the sun or from daylight in a space. So this was probably pretty intuitive. The farther away you get from the window, the less contribution you'll get from daylight. Does that make sense? The blue line is I don't know why they put it at the line of the table, right? Don't read into that. It's just like your average light level that you want, right, Brittany? So imagine this blue line is 20-foot candles, and I want 20-foot candles here and here and here all the way through the space. And the orange line is, can I get 20-foot candles or more? And when can I no longer get 20-foot candles in my space just from daylight? Does that make sense to everybody? Main reason this dies off so quickly is, because there's an angle. The sun's got an angle that it comes in from the window. If you make the window bigger, right, you get more daylight. But interestingly, the fall off is pretty similar, right? Just because, again, it's that same angle. You're not making that much bigger. You're not making a difference in the angle, which has a bigger impact over a long distance, the angle, right? As opposed to just moving the ray, like moving my line. So a way to illustrate that is if I draw a line like this, right? And then I draw a line like this, I'll try to draw this at about the same angle. by increasing the height of my window, it just doesn't make that big of a difference. What I really want to do is I want to reflect light farther into my space and change the angle. That makes sense? Okay. This is the same thing. It's just breaking it down into reflected, direct, interreflected, you know, that kind of thing. Obviously, light is bouncing around you all the time. This is a super loaded slide. I will just kind of let you guys kind of look at this, but this is different treatments in different directions. So again, this top one on the left, just to orient everybody, that's a north facing window. And it's how much light do you get in from it. And I believe the yellow is, I always have to remind myself of this slide, even though I look at it twice before I give this presentation. The yellow is the direct and the black is the reflected. So in this view down here on the bottom, you get a really high amount of light from the direct, and then it kind of dies off in the interreflected. Over here in this diagram here, you're getting much more interreflected because the light that's coming in here is diffuse by nature. Because it doesn't have a sun, which is a singular point source, it has mostly light that's coming in that's diffuse from the sky. So the sky has light coming from all directions. So that's why this black line is higher up here. This is kind of a loaded slide and it's pretty hard to understand. You have to kind of like look at each individual part. So in the interest of time, I'll let you guys do that on your own time. Okay, cool techniques here, right? So having white ceilings is really great to reflect light off of. You can bring light farther into the space, reflect it off the white ceiling, and you get a good daylight control throughout a great space. You can notice here in slide 2, like how, you know, north to south, how narrow this building is. And if you look really closely, there's a giant courtyard in the middle of it. If you look through that window right there, like the building has another part of the building that, you know, that has like another wing, so to speak. And they're both oriented the same way. They're both kind of long in the same direction. And that way you can get a lot of daylight north and south from this building. Oh, pretty cool. Here's some nice clerestory windows in this library. Just regular patient view in the hospitals. This would be considered a skylight here on 4 because it's not a roof monitor, because it's not being directed and reflected off of a surface that is diffuse. It's coming straight through in view. And then here in this library here in number 3 is kind of interesting. They've got a lot of techniques going on here, but if you notice, they put a window, they put 2 windows here, and then there's a block which directs, and there's an overhang on the outside. So that blocks some of the direct light, and then they bounce it off into this curved white ceiling. And that curved white ceiling actually helps kind of direct the light back down, straight down into the space. Because if you imagine like you bounce a ball off of a curved thing, it will come straight down. If you bounce a ball off of a straight thing, it will bounce off in the same angle that it hit at, right? I knew that 6 years of optical development was going to come in use sometime, right? So top lighting is just skylights, right? Real simple. And the big thing to remember here is that it's super effective for buildings that are not super tall and they have large footprints. So obviously you can think skyscrapers, you know, how would you get top lighting down into the bottom levels of a skyscraper? Like pretty hard. Takes up a lot of space. But in warehouses or like a Home Depot or, you know, any of these big box stores, top lighting is super, super effective there. Because, you know, it's only 40 feet tall. There's one floor, super effective. This is an interesting call out. It's mandated by most energy codes. So most building types have some sort of top lighting aspect that you're required to hit. That's why you see a lot of skylights on warehouses and stuff like that. So has anybody seen buildings like this, what's called the sawtooth clerestory or the sawtooth roof monitor? It can be a really nice environment on the inside because it brings in so much daylight, but it's all kind of nice and diffused out. And if you point these, you know, kind of towards, there's two techniques here. You could point it south such that you get a lot of direct sunlight into them, but you can also point them point these windows north, and you get a direct view. So like, look at this guy right here that has a direct view to the north sky, which would be just all blue and no direct sunlight. But then the south light is the direct sunlight from the south is coming in and then reflecting off into the building. So you kind of get both. It depends on, you know, what's the ratio and how do you build these clerestory monitors and stuff like that. But you can orient them either way and you can get some good benefits out of them. And then here, that roof monitor is a different style of roof monitor or clerestory window, and you get it bouncing off of the top surface and coming back down. So now you can see here, there's this yellow ray of sunlight that does get to come straight through here. So you can always adjust these aspect ratios and how deep the window is and the height of the window and stuff, right? Like that, and do the calculations and adjust them like that. Here's some examples of those ratios, right? That people in architecture are going to look at. They're going to say, how do you build this thing to build the best experience and maximize your daylighting and save on electrical energy usage, right? All this light is free. There's no energy cost to it, right? There's only the building in the first place. So sometimes a lot of people will look at this as an ROI calculation, and they'll basically say like, how, you know, what's my electric load going to be for lighting over time? And you can shave off quite a bit of your energy usage by being smart about it. There's that sawtooth methodology. Here's a whole bunch of skylights above an area. Here's skylights in big box retail up here, skylights in a gymnasium, a nice clerestory window in what looks like a PNC bank. A lot of good daylight in there. And then this is a really funny building, like this brick house where they built some, you know, kind of clerestory windows in like an upper deal. But this actually can be quite effective in residences. I've been in a few houses that do something like this. This one looks kind of funny, looks something like some weird bell house or something, but it can be pretty effective and you can get a lot of light in that way. Has anybody seen anything that looks like this guy, the solar tube? Yeah, they're not super popular, but they do get used, right? Has anybody seen one in person? No, interesting. Nobody. Okay. Well, that should tell you the popularity. They do get used, but they take up a lot of space, right? Because you need to keep. This happens to do with the optics, but if you make something like this angled inwards, what ends up happening is the ray bounces and then eventually gets rejected. Let me draw something like this real quick. Okay, we'll go blue like this. So if you build something that looks like a funnel, what ends up happening is your ray comes in and then it bounces and then it bounces again and then it bounces again and then it goes away. Oops, that meant to be an arrow. Got it. Right? So you have to keep these things kind of parallel from the entry point. And there's a relationship between the skylight on the top, whatever that size is, you have to keep that stuff parallel all the way to where it enters the space. So the bigger the skylight, the bigger the solar tube. And obviously, if you want to get a lot of light, you need a decent sized skylight. So that's why these things are really hard to use in general. It just has to do with the physics and the optics and how light bounces around in a space. What you can do is you can use a concentrator, right? This looks like something straight out of some, weird, sci-fi or, evil mastermind plan where he builds something on the roof to take over the world and send signals to some alien race to come kill us all. But what this does is it, has a parabola to focus the light into a specific spot. And then now that light is like a ray. It's like a columnated light, and you can direct that columnated light all over the place. The problem with this is it has to face the sun to work. So this has to move and track the sun throughout the day. Otherwise, it won't work at all. Everything will just get rejected. And actually, this is called a heliostat. But some solar panels do this too. Well, it's actually not a solar panel, but well, they do solar panels like that too. But there are power plants out there that would do one of two things. They use a bunch of mirrors and they send the light up to a collector. This is the same kind of idea. That collector can be either one of two things: a solar panel, which just gets hammered by, by tons of light and generates a ton of energy. Or the other one that's more common is it creates a lot of heat. So they use a bunch of mirrors to like send, it's like when I was, 8 years old with the Fresnel lens magnifying glasses and like burning ants on the sidewalk. That's basically what they're doing. And it's not ants, it's like a salt that they heat up really hot and they get the energy from it. They make steam, right? So again, these heliostats are cool, but they're very impractical because they have to like have motors and solar tracking and all that kind of crap. Okay, so glazing. And we're doing pretty good on time. I think we'll get out of here about 7:35, 7:40. So there's this thing called angle of incidence, right? And it's basically, you could think of this as, am I coming straight onto a window? Let me draw this in like a nice blue here. So that angle of incidence is 0. I'm straight onto the window. This angle of incidence would be something like 45 degrees, right? This is maybe more like 80 degrees. Whoops, there we go. And so this graph here represents the amount of reflection off glass with the angle of incidence. The way to like test this out is if you're looking out a door or a window and you're looking straight on. In my other room that I used to do this presentation on, there was a really great example of this because you could actually see a window at night and you could see the reflection of the back of the wall. I don't have a good view here, but if you have a window, basically like instead of looking straight on at it, put your head like very like grazing to it, right? And what you'll see is that you'll be able to see back into the room better. You'll see a part of the reflection of the room. And that is this exact line right here. So as you get really close to the glass and you look at it just grazing, you're going to see more of the inside of whatever room you're in. And as you go more directly looking at it, very little of it's going to be reflected. You're going to be able to see much better outside. This is why if anybody's taken like a photography class, if you're trying to take a picture through glass, you always need to be taking the picture straight against the glass, not at an angle, because you'll ruin your shot because it'll have what's called a Fresnel reflection, which is what this is talking about. And then glass always has some amount of absorption in it too. Any questions on that stuff? Groovy. Tom looks pensive. Okay. This is a bunch of different treatments of glass. All this is to say is that there is a relationship between the amount of visual transmission in blue and solar heat gain coefficient, which means how much infrared does it let through. And you can do better and better treatments to get your solar heat gain coefficient in red down lower, which means it lets less heat in from the sun. But you can see that it's kind of variable. And in general, you get less visible light too when you do that. Does that make sense? It's hard to separate these things out. We got to use a lot of technology to do this. But in general, it kind of reduces the overall transmission when you do that. Usually not that big a deal when you're talking about the sun giving you 10,000 foot candles and you only need 50, right? 50% transmission, still great. 50% is great when it's free, right? It's like it sucks when you only get 50% of something that's really expensive, right? So you can do shading. You can do, those light shelves that we talk about, and you can calculate what's called your cutoff angle. Now, the interesting thing is if you extrapolate that one light shelf and you say, okay, I don't just have one light shelf, I have 3 light shelves. Right now, you maintain your view, but you really reduce the amount of visibility that you have for glare. Now to keep going, I get a lot of light shelves. Well, I can still see through all those little light shelves. It's kind of patterned, right? I've got these things that are like, horizontal, and I can see through them. And then eventually you get to Venetian blinds, right? You know, the blinds that you can like adjust and they tilt up and down. Well, that's the same concept. Those are literally light shelves, right? They will bounce the light back up onto the ceiling, especially if they're white, but you'll still be able to see through them. And you can play with this ratio, like how many of them do you need, and how wide are they, and there's a relationship there, right? You can see the angle here, alpha. The alpha stays the same on all three of these. So the angle of blockage is the same, but you can reduce the depth of that light shelf into what is basically a Venetian blind. Here's some pictures of techniques where they've done this. So all these methods are effective at allowing light to come through, but not direct sunlight through shading. And then obviously you can use, blinds and controls and stuff like that to just shade your space. You can use, this has 2 levels. There's a fritted, what's called a fritted, which means it has little holes in it. That's a fritted film. And then there's, more of your blackout shade, right? And that has like 2 levels. How much sun do you want to block and what does it look like? And then this one's interesting. It's got, vertical blinds above the light shelf. It's kind of interesting. This is a good picture because it shows how bad cameras are. We're all pretty good at this nowadays because we use cameras in our pockets so much. But historically, cameras were really good, really bad at adapting to like these crazy differences in light levels. Our eyes are much better at it because our eyes are logarithmic as far as the adaptation goes, but cameras are more linear. So they've struggled for a long time. And if you take a picture of something that's like looking right at the sun, it's really hard to get a good picture on your camera. Still, problem still exists.
Can I ask a question really quick?
Yeah, of course.
These light shelves inside, I was just curious if like these are an older thing or a newer thing. Like, has anyone in those groups seen these utilized before? I've never seen these utilized in like an interior application. I was just wondering if anyone else has like designed a space or seen a space with those, or if they're like more outdated. I don't know.
That right there is a boombox. It's hard to see.
Right.
Yeah. That should tell you what era this picture is from.
So we don't really use those a lot anymore then.
No, but we still use the ones on the outside. So these are all pretty modern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems just like a good idea. I don't know why they went out of style, I guess. Maybe just because now we have daylight sensors.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I mean, my intuition would be that it kind of takes away or makes your head feel, kind of scrunched. It'd probably be a perceptual thing. And you're trying to like maximize your usable interior space. This is just a hypothesis. Like I actually don't know this for sure, Madison. This is just like a guess. If you're trying to maximize your usable interior space, because every square foot that you have to do of interior space, you have to climate control. So you want that all to be like usable, maximally usable. And I think that to build these light shelves on the inside, you want them to be a certain distance away from the ceiling to be able to bounce the light into the space. So that means they have to come down a certain amount. Well, if you need that, if that's a prerequisite, then your ceiling has to be high enough and the light shelf has to be high enough for somebody to walk under it because it's a usable space now. And my guess is the combination of all 3 of those things, because you also don't want to have your ceiling too high because now you need to build each floor taller. That's more expensive. So all 3 of those things, I think, probably come together to say like this is not a very popular technique at this day and age, and people just do it on the outside.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm pretty sure it also has to do with solar heat gain as well. If the protrusion's inside your space, you're gaining heat rather than rejecting it out. If the extrusion's outside the space.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would depend on what your glazing's like, but that certainly could play a point. Any questions on delivering the daylight? Just so you know, you guys can all hire experts on this stuff. There are literally daylighting experts that like are consultants, and they will do this. And there's usually like big architecture firms. There's like people that are very specialized into daylighting techniques. Bringing the 2 together. Does anybody not have familiarity with lighting controls? Raise your hand if you are not familiar with lighting controls. There's a whole section on lighting controls, but I'm just gonna like, we can go through this pretty quick if no. Got a whole bunch of people off camera and they're not raising their hands or anything like that. So I'm gonna assume we've got lighting controls, okay? Feel free to ask questions. Okay, so if my daylight is variable, obviously, which it is, and I need a minimum baseline, like Brittany said, of like, 20 to 30 foot candles to like just be kind of be able to see and do my stuff. It doesn't matter if it's 5 p.m. and I'm just now leaving work, or maybe it's 5 p.m. and I'm having my happy hour. I need some amount of light there, but obviously the sun's variable. So I need to modulate my electric light, and when I have daylight, I can bring the electric light down. And when I don't have daylight, I can bring the electric light up, aka dimming. LEDs were great for this because LEDs are super easy to dim, right? It was one of the hugest benefits. Like fluorescents were harder to dim. They sometimes flickered. Dimming is hard on fluorescent lamps, actually, like it reduces the lifespan. And LEDs are like, dim me all day long. I do not care, right? LEDs mainly don't like heat. So here's what that looks like, right? At dawn, the bottom x-axis here is dawn as time throughout the day. Daylight comes up, I can reduce my electric light, and you got a dark cloud. My photocells can just say, oh, I got a cloud. It's not contributing as much light as I need. I can bump my electric light up a little bit, and I can, basically just modulate it throughout the day. And as long as that modulation happens over about a 5 to 10 minute time frame, you can't even notice. You'll never even see it. If you do it over 5 seconds, you'll see it. But most control systems can do this over a variable time frame. You say, I got a photocell, I get a photocell signal, and what's my time frame to dim to that new level? And you can set it to be like 5 minutes. Nobody will even notice. We actually had a fun experiment at one job where we used to give a presentation, and we would start everybody off in the room, and there was a bunch of lights, and we had them all on. And it was an hour-long presentation, and we had an hour-long dim cycle. And so by the end of the presentation, we had brought the lights to 20% of normal that they had started with on this presentation. And we were just saying if anybody noticed. Every once in a while, somebody would notice, but literally we only dimmed the lights like 1% at a time over that, 45 minutes to 50 minutes, because we wanted some time to like show people at the end. Almost nobody ever noticed, because they're really just looking at the presentation screen. They're not really paying attention. And the lighting was very good. It was very diffuse and soft. And so it wasn't like you had like a light in your eyeball that was dimming down that would be more noticeable. You know what I mean? Anyways. So what this slide is bringing up here is the aspect of 2 rooms that are next to each other. One gets a lot of daylight, one does not. We talked about on Tuesday how you have a window and you get a lot of daylight on a desk. Makes that desk like really bright in one spot, but the rest of it's hard to see because your eyes and your brain are adapting to the brightest thing that you can see. So if you have a room, you can see 2 rooms next to each other, or 2 spaces, 2 cubicles, like whatever it may be, and one's super bright. What you have to end up doing is overlighting the other space. You don't get to just be at 20 foot candles. You might have to bump that up to like 80, right? So direct sunlight can actually make a problem in some circumstances because you have to over design that space just to make it feel comfortable. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to reduce the contrast ratio. Does everybody remember that term that we talked about in Tuesday, contrast ratio? You're trying to reduce that contrast ratio to not be 100 to 1, but to be more like 20 to 1, because contrast ratio is really what the problem is. Kind of talked about this already, but there's an interesting expectation with natural light. We're all used to it. Natural light changes throughout the day. You get clouds, you grow up with this. I don't know if it's built into us biologically, but you're just totally used to it. You expect it. We do not expect the electric lights to change like that. If you're in a room and all of a sudden the lights start like dimming up and down and it's like, simulating a cloud, and I actually built a fixture that did that. We tested it at Acuity. Like, could you build a bunch of fixtures that looked like clouds were moving overhead? And from a psychological perspective, everybody thinks that something's wrong. You're like, oh, surely something's wrong with these light fixtures, right? And you can't get people over that. So you do not expect your electric lights to change like that. So that's why if you have a 5 or 10 minute fade, you're all good, right? So the energy savings that you get from using daylight in your space is called daylight harvesting, right? You're harvesting the daylight as a resource so that you don't have to use another resource, which is watts, right? Which is your electric energy. And daylight compensation is the practice of complementing however much daylight I have in my space, whether it's spatial, like we talked about, there's a lot of daylight here and not a lot of daylight here, or to just set like uniform light levels because my daylight is nice and uniform in the space, but there's a cloud and I have to bring my light up. Ian, don't die on me, dude. So those are the difference between daylight harvesting and daylight compensation, right? Those two terms make sense to everybody. I don't know what building this is, but I totally want to work there, right? Looks sick. Just, you okay, Hector? Do you know what it is?
No, just giving you a thumbs up.
Oh, okay, cool. Right on. Yeah, it's a nice looking building, right? It's got a lot of view, a lot of glass, probably pretty comfortable. Looks like they had some money to spend on it, so they probably did some good job, probably had some good architects. Got this nice pathway that I totally want to just like, walk around with some nice like Zen, music, and maybe get like like a sand rake, just kind of make some nice designs in the sand and, chill out from the chaos of the world. View matters basically is like the gist, right? Having views of the outside world is just really, really helpful. I mean, some people even in the environment that's not nature, right? Like being on top of a skyscraper in New York and being able to see just like the world and like all the stuff out there. I think, most people will go out there and they'll stand on the railing, right, to try to get out of their own head or whatever. And you're just looking out there at the view, right? It just brings you an interesting psychological perspective. So views are cool. Views are good. The size of the view matters. So this is just how like an angle, a projection of a window. If you're really far away from a big window, it looks small. If you're really close to a big window, your view looks big. So now I asked earlier, what do you think about the aspect ratio of buildings, right? Anybody have any ideas about what they think would be most ideal based on the things that we've talked about here with view, orientation? All good. In general, it seems like most of these things are really great with rectangles that are the longer the better, right? Because if you think about it, now you're not too far away from a big window, so you have a nice view. The other thing is if you put those long sides north and south facing, you have a lot of area for daylight where you don't have direct glare very often. So those two things combine to be like the general best footprint for a building. There's obviously a limit. If you make that rectangle super, super narrow and you can only fit like, one desk and 2 walkways in there, not very functional. Also becomes super hard to like deal with, just the general stuff of buildings like egress, fire exits, like elevators, all that kind of crap. So there's limits. But in general, that's a nice, just a nice deal. And, there's no like perfect ratio or anything. It's just like having one side that's nice and long generally can be pretty good. That's ideal. There's lots of buildings that are square and kind of, kind of rotated, and they can do a really good job because obviously, like we said in the very beginning, the site is the most important thing. Well, if you own a piece of land as a developer, you bought that land and all you have to build on is a square, you're going to make a square building. You know what I mean? So there's limits of the real world here. Okay, right on schedule here. Okay, so this is modeling daylighting and daylight metrics. These are kind of things that you have to hear more than once for it to like really sink in. So I'll introduce it. You can look at it, but I would also just say that like in general, these are metrics that you won't really use very often unless you're in the space, but you can just be familiar with them and be all good. So the daylight factor is the light level inside divided by the light level outside. So if you think about that, what is that? That's the ratio of how much light from the outside that you're able to bring into the space. Let's say it's 50%. That means you're doing a really amazing job at bringing in a whole lot of light from the outside. Now, maybe that's too high. Maybe you don't want that much light in your space. So this daylight factor, higher is not always better here, right? Maybe you want a daylight factor of like 0.1. It's 1,000-foot candles outside. You only want 100 inside. You want it well distributed. That's your daylight factor. Now, daylight autonomy, higher is better, right? This is out of 100%, percentage of time that you have over your 20-foot candles, like what Brittany said. So 20, 30, 40, whatever that number is. How much of the percent of the day can I rely entirely on electric light? That's daylight autonomy. Spatial daylight autonomy takes that a step further and breaks it down per area. So what percentage of my space receives that level of daylight for a given amount of time? And then useful daylight illuminance is the number of hours that is in a useful range. So if I've got 6 hours of daylight illuminance, useful daylight illuminance, maybe that's pretty good, right? That's most of the day that people are going to be in my space and using electric lights, unless you're like that building on C470 that has like troffers on that are on 24 hours a day, no matter what day it is, every day of the year, including Christmas. I've driven by it. Super annoying from like a lighting geek over here, but these are all used in tandem, right? None of them are used by themselves. So daylight autonomy is probably, and spatial daylight autonomy are probably the ones that are like the most important, because that just gives you a real targeted metric of, what percent of my area am I covering that gets sufficient daylight? Good thing. Here's what the false color diagrams would look like of when you were to do a simulation and you would give a report to somebody, like one of these experts in daylighting would do a simulation and calculation, very similar to what somebody brought up as far as like a lighting calculation. Same math, actually. And all they're going to do is say, okay, like what's the percentage and what does that look like? This, to me, looks a lot like an illuminance contour plot, if anybody's ever done that, right? You get your illuminance lines and like, okay, like here's where my 0.5-foot candle's in, here's where my 1-foot candle is, here's where my 2-foot candles are. Maybe it's the other way around, right? 1/2-foot candle, 1-foot candle, 2-foot candles. And so very, very similar, same concept. And then obviously you can calculate these, right? You can do this in software. It's a whole bunch of software, programs to do this. I don't think AGI does a ton of it. It's like kind of not their bread and butter, but they do some of this, I know. And then there's a couple other programs like Visual that will do this, which is from Acuity. And then there's more like specific programs that are specifically for daylighting. And usually the good ones use what's called a true ray tracing engine. And that means that they're actually like tracing the rays and they're not using clever tricks on the math to make the calculation be faster. So like Visual, like I know the guy that wrote the new Visual engine and it's super, super fast if anybody uses that from Acuity. The reason it's so fast is because there's some special tricks you can do with the math to make that calculation happen really quick. It tends to be less accurate when you talk about daylight because of the way that it uses those tricks. So the common engine out there is called radiance. Here's a false color of the luminance, again, the brightness in the space. You can see how those correlate to the false color really well. And a summary slide. Any questions? That's it. You guys hammered it out. Bravo. I was pretty on target. I was like somewhere between 7:30 and 7:35. So awesome. Everybody have a wonderful evening. Thank you for your attention and your participation and, humoring a lighting nerd, kind of give some lectures and stuff like that. Hopefully it was somewhat entertaining. You got a bunch of other instructors for a bunch of other topics here. And I will see all of you on a Saturday. And hopefully I have slept a lot more, and hopefully you all have slept a lot more, and we will move super fast and be done with that super early. So I wish you all a great weekend.
Thanks, Chris.
Yep.
Thank you.
Lunch.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Bye,
Chris.
Brian.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.